My name is Niall Flores, and I am bringing another podcast presentation. This is Podcasting for WordPress. I originally presented this at WordCamp Dayton 2014. My objective to this podcast is to explain what podcasting is, share tips on podcasting, share third-party tools for podcasting, and share podcasting plugins for WordPress. So, what is podcasting? Podcasting, in short, is sequential content creation done via video or audio, and it uses a syndication feed. What can you podcast about? Anything, particularly anything you are passionate about. It's really easy for people to tell if you're actually passionate about something or not, when they listen to your voice. The way that you emote really has a factor. So if you're not passionate about what you are speaking about, then probably you're not going to attract people as much. Now maybe you could get by on that, but eventually you'll find that you'll have a hard time coming up with topics to speak about, so your podcast will just dwindle to nothing. My philosophy on podcasting and audio is very much like I have about content creation in general. And I actually have a quote that I always say to everybody. I've said it throughout my blog, on social networks. It is, create content on as many mediums as possible to potentially reach more of your target audience. This is pretty cut and dry, but for those who don't understand, more people that come to your site, the better. And to do that, you're going to need to not just have content that's in text. You're going to want images. You're going to want to have audio. You're going to have video. It's really important to try to reach to them in a medium that they connect best with, because obviously there's only so many hours in the day, and some people, they get a lot of their information via radio or audio. So podcasting actually is really great, because then they can subscribe and download and listen while they're either on break, or they're cleaning a house, or they're going in between jobs, from the house to the job, or from the job to the house. Another thing, this is actually something I get asked a lot. It's kind of like the same question of how long should a blog post be, and this length of the podcast. It's definitely a great question. It actually depends on what you're covering and what your target audience is most interested in. Some can be as short as 2 to 5 minutes, and others 30 to 1 hour. Now, 2 to 5 minutes I usually consider, and I actually call my own podcast episodes that are 2 to 5 minutes are mini podcasts. This is just to differentiate between the long podcast and the small podcasts. That way people know that they're only expecting 2 to 5 minutes rather than maybe 15 to 30 minutes. Then I also have ones like podcast presentations, which are maybe 1 to 2 hours, depending on how long the presentations were, because usually what I do is I repodcast my presentations I do at conferences. So it's actually at your own discretion, but just make sure that you keep your listeners in mind, because some of them will just flip over some episodes if they're way too long, or if they're just not interested in the topic. This is actually is another one that kind of works in with blog posts and everything too. I get how often should you podcast? Actually, this also depends on how comfortable your schedule is, but also consider consistency, especially if you're trying to build a loyal following. Kind of keep an ear out to your target audience. Maybe do some surveys. They'll tell you how often they're interested in hearing what you want to talk about. In fact, using the survey idea, you can actually get an idea of what they would love you to talk about, like exactly what specific topics you want to talk about. Now, there are some people out there that are podcasting on their own, and they're using like a third-party site like Blog Talk Radio, and this is completely fine. However, you don't have as much control over your content, and they stick their own ads in there, and it's done over the telephone. In fact, I find that the quality is not that great, and when you decide that you want to go off on your own, downloading and converting over to a normal podcast format, like taking it and then bringing it over into a program like Audacity or Adobe, and trying to work with it is really a pain. The sound is really bad. You get pops and everything else. I actually started doing podcasting on Blog Talk Radio and found that I've had to re-podcast all of my episodes. It's great that I have them now, but I could have saved myself time by just doing it on my own in the first place. For some people, even if you podcast, you're going to want to tell your visitors how to subscribe to your podcast. So you can have them subscribe via Pocket Cast app for mobile, or iTunes or other desktop media players. One of the big things, and I'm glad I'm mentioning this because this was actually, it's not so recent, but fairly recent news for me. A lot of people don't ask this question, but they should, on where to store your podcast media files. And I've got two solutions that are very, recommended. They come very recommended by some of the top podcasters in the industry. I have Libsyn, LIBSYN.com, and Blubrry. It's BLUBRRY.com. The reason why you want to use sites like these is because you don't want to use your own. You want to protect your site from going down in case you've been syndicated by a larger site. So, for example, say TechCrunch picks you up, and they have a lot of traffic, but you have some itty-bitty shared host. Yeah, you're probably going to go down if you're hosting your own files. So you will want to look into a solution, and for people looking for an affordable solution, those two are really good. I know that there are some people that want to use Amazon, but there have been people out there that have had some pretty terrible stories of their experience with Amazon storage, that they stored their podcast and they ended up with like $1,000 bill because they got picked up by a larger site and had a lot of downloads, and that was not it. And expected cost. The ones I'm listing are made by podcasters for podcasters. So now that I've gotten through some general questions, I actually kind of want to go through a little podcasting 101. So some of these tips, you know, you may have heard before, or it might seem a little redundant, but really, you'd be surprised on even some of the best people fail to you know, use these points. So be yourself. Like I touched on, people know when you're being fake. They can sound it. It's like going to McDonald's and somebody is saying, and I'm going to say this in the exact term because I worked at McDonald's a long time ago, so I know how this feels on a bad day, and you really don't want to be in a good, nice to anybody. Thank you for choosing McDonald's. How may I help you? Doesn't that sound fake? That really is a turnoff. So your best bet is to be yourself. And if you're having a bad day, don't podcast and tell you're having a good time or in a good mood. Better just to leave those things out the door unless you have a podcast about ranting. Cover topics that matter to your audience. Nobody's going to listen to your podcast if you're not talking about anything that matters to anybody. Don't make an elaborate script. Make an outline. If you're making a script, you get too caught up on reading those words, and then you start sounding like you're in class and going real slow. An outline makes it so much easier, so you actually stay on topic. If you're using intro and outro music, keep it brief. We don't need a minute and a half intro or outro, or intro, beginning, outro, the end music. Don't make it really annoying. Try to pick something consistent, and also don't pick copyrighted music that could get you in trouble. Music that I use for my podcast is one that I learned how to make. And even though that the original length is a couple minutes, I've only put in maybe 29 seconds in the beginning and maybe almost 40 at the end. And so this seems to be a good balance. It's not too annoying, and it just doesn't seem, like, hey, when am I going to get to the meat and potatoes of this podcast? Don't be afraid to mess up. You can always cut out those long pauses, likes, ands, and ums. I once talked to a client of mine who worked for CNN, and I honestly asked her about this issue, and she actually, even though I knew it was okay to mess up, it was the fact of the matter that I wanted to bring up that a lot of people put ums and ands and likes and so's and all that kind of stuff in their talking. And she said that it is not, it's not like something like taboo. It is something a little more endearing that makes you more human, and that people can connect with you with. So if you have them, that's fine. But if they're a little excessive, you can still go through, listen, and cut out those areas. And then my last one I wanted to say, and this is a good one, choose a microphone with a good noise canceling filter. The reason why is unless you're in some type of really cool studio that has like a noise canceling and all that kind of stuff, or soundproof, that you're probably going to face a lot of noise and everything. You could have people walking in your home, kids giggling, whatever, people snoring and all that kind of stuff. So a noise canceling feature actually helps eliminate a lot of that extra garbage. One of the things I like to tell people, podcasting, just like blogging, doesn't have to be perfect. Like anything you're trying to succeed at, that comes with time and practice. Oh, I almost forgot. 2 more tips. If you're concerned about SEO, create a paragraph to summarize your podcast or add a transcript. Another thing you could do is create a video version of your podcast and place it on YouTube and utilize the closed caption. Now I want to caution about that, using the closed caption. If you're using that and you're not accurate, then it won't match up with the rest of your video. So probably your alternate would be to use that version of the video podcast, bring it back onto your site, and actually use the transcript in the website. So you can have both the podcast there and the video, so it gives actually your visitors a choice of what they want to listen or view your podcast in. Some third-party podcasting tools. We have Audacity, and for those who don't know, it's open source. It's free. You're gonna actually want to install it with the lame MP3 add-on. However, if in the case like myself that the lame MP3 add-on doesn't work, which this actually takes your WAV file, which Audacity records in by default, and it converts it into an MP3 version. Well, sometimes for some people that doesn't work. So what I do is I have iTunes as well. So this is actually really good for the bootstrap podcaster. So you could take that WAV file, add it to your iTunes library, and then right click and create a MP3 version of it. For those who have a chunk of change in their pocket, more than a chunk of change, you can actually buy and use Adobe Creative Cloud to make your podcast. And another thing I like to use is FeedBurner. FeedBurner is for RSS feeds, which is what is used to syndicate your podcast with. So here's an actual screenshot of what Audacity would look like. And then while this isn't like FeedBurner and actually or iTunes, this actually kind of gives you the section on one of the better, or I should say the best plugin out there for WordPress for podcasting, on inserting your podcast into iTunes. So there's a section for that, and also if you see there's also a tab for feeds. So podcast related tools for WordPress. I only listed one. It is the best one. I have heard so many things that are great about it. I know that there's other podcasts out there, podcasting tools, especially plugins for WordPress, but this one is actually the best. It's Blubrry PowerPress podcasting plugin. What does Blubrry PowerPress do? It has HTML5 integration in both audio and video media support. It has the ability to manage multiple podcast channels. It is capable of integrating into iTunes. It works with custom post types and custom taxonomies. It has options for download stats and contains extended advanced settings or simple settings depending on your preference. So if you're using Blubrry PowerPress, you can hook it up to iTunes, as I've mentioned. PowerPress is pretty easy. All you have to do is make sure you fill all the fields out, and what it does is let iTunes know what your podcast is and what it's all about, and its rating, if whether it's not for the children or if it's for all, everybody, and then you can get listed if they approve you. Approval could vary. It could be within a day, or it could be more. It just depends on how well you fill it out, so be as thorough as possible. And so here's a screenshot of if you do get added to iTunes. This is actually how mine looks on iTunes. pretty cool, huh? And then wanted to give a few resources and everything out there. Sites with great podcasting tips. The Audacity to Podcast. It is very in-depth. It is everything that you really need to know about using Audacity and podcasting. It's a very well done site. Another one that, even though I don't listen to them, I've heard a lot about is Podcast Answer Man. And the URL to the Audacity to Podcast is the audacitytopodcast.com. And then Podcast Answer Man is podcastanswerman.com. And you can look up Learn to Podcast on your site. There are others, but these two are really big ones that people like to go to. As for WordPress, since this is actually a presentation on podcasting for WordPress, some of the great podcasts out there are Dradcast, it's dradcast.com. WP Water Cooler, it's at wpwatercooler.com. And then WordPress Weekly, it's at WP Tavern, and you can look it up under WordPress Weekly. There are many more, but these are ones I actually like. Some of them are, individuals, and others are a mix of several people podcasting together. The topics vary, could be user, designer, developer, themes, plugins, whatever. And then my podcast, it's at blondishnet, and then under the category podcast. And I talk about blogging, social media, web design, definitely WordPress. I'm not sure yet if I'm actually going to make a WordPress specific one, but it's a possibility. And so that concludes my presentation on podcasting for WordPress. So if you have any questions, you can go to my site at blondish.net. That's blondish.net, like blonde, like my hair. And then I'm on Twitter. My Twitter handle is blondishnet. Again, blondishnet. You can find me on Facebook under Niall Flores, and LinkedIn under blondishnet, and then SlideShare under blondishnet. You'll be able to find this podcast on iTunes as well. And don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for listening.